Okay, good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining. It's good to see you all again. This is going to be maybe a bit of review for some of you. This is the very first presentation that we gave during the Brand Ambassador program, and now this is meeting 9 for all of us. So we're getting really close to finishing up. I thought it was a good time to kind of go back and review some of the basics and then open it up for a Q&A session at the end. So hopefully you guys came with questions. If not, maybe some will arise during the presentation. So with that, we'll get into it. So you might see a couple of new faces on this slide since the very first meeting, the first of which is the new Director of Marketing Communication, and that's James Berger. And James, if you'd like to take it from here and introduce yourself.
Sure. So I'm James Berger. I'm the new Director of Marketing Communications. Come to CSUB from Community Action Partnership of Kern, and before that, the Californian. And I'm super excited to be here. I'm like you guys. I'm a brand newbie, but Chris is getting me up to speed real fast. So happy to be here. Happy to see you all.
It's great to have you, James. And I think, Shelby, I don't think you were on staff quite yet at the first meeting as well. So Shelby Parker is the Marketing Communication Specialist. I'm sure all of you on this call have crossed paths with Shelby. She does all of our social media and email marketing, and she's awesome as well. So this is the team. I know you've all probably seen Albert and EJ walking around campus doing video and photo as well. But this is your Marcom team, and we're always here as a resource for you all. Start with the name. Let's see, I've got a couple of things in the chat here. Oh, we're good. So California State University Bakersfield is the official name of the university. We all know that. These are some of the other names that we are allowed to use: CSUB, CSU Bakersfield, and Cal State Bakersfield. And of course, our tagline is Runners on the Rise. Note the backtick in front of the R in runners. It's not an apostrophe, it's a backtick, which is on the upper left of your keyboard, right under the tilde. So I see a lot of times either the backtick is not used or an apostrophe is used instead. So just be mindful of that. I think you're all pretty aware of that by now. What's not in a name, and this is, I underline Cal State because I see this a lot. I've even seen it on some of the athletic shirts. I mean, every Cal State doesn't differentiate us from any other Cal State in the CSU system. So we try not to reference ourselves as Cal State. I know that locally here, growing up, being a local in Bakersfield, that's always kind of what we called it growing up. But we're just asking everyone here, let's don't do that. Let's try to differentiate ourselves. And then some of these other ones I haven't heard, but they're on the list for a reason. So someone's heard them at some point. So just try to use the official names if we can. Into the logo use right away. This is the primary logo, the one that's more horizontal in nature. And this is the one that we should always try to use first if space allows. And you'll see that there are two different versions, one for a light and one for a dark background. The one for the light background has blue text, is kind of the easy way to differentiate the two. The one for a darker or blue background has yellow text and a small white line around the shield. We'll get into that a little bit later, how to differentiate the two. If full color is not an option using the primary logo, it also exists in single color. It exists in single color blue. This is our Pantone 661 blue, or it also exists just in black. So I know, like for embossing or etching, laser engraving, things like that, we have to use the single color version, and it produces pretty well there. So always reach out to us if you need a special version of the logo. If horizontal space is limited, there are other options as well. The stacked version, that also comes in full color, single color. That's the one on the left. And then the CSUB version. This also comes in a stacked version as well as a horizontal. The horizontal version is the one you're seeing here, but it comes in a stacked version as well. We just ask, typically, if we're doing anything outside of the community, like for instance, if we're doing enrollment outreach or advertising in other communities outside of Bakersfield, we ask that you don't use the CSUB version just because it doesn't spell out the name. And a lot of times, when we're recruiting and competing against other schools nationwide, people don't know what CSUB stands for. They don't know where it is. So we ask that you use the spelled out version in those cases. We'll get right into a little bit of a quiz here, and you guys can reply in the chat, or I'll just reveal the answer pretty quickly here. But there's weird scenarios sometimes when you have to place the logo on a strange colored background or a gradient, or there's limited space. So in this instance, the regular primary version would not reproduce well because there's not enough contrast in the text versus the background. So in this particular version, background, you would probably need to use just the single color white version of the logo because it gives you the most contrast. Even the single color black version on this gray doesn't give you enough contrast, and we'll go into ADA compliance and how much contrast you actually need. But this is probably the best version for this particular background. And then what about this one? This is a strange kind of vertical gold background as well. If you try to use the primary version, obviously, which is always what we want to try to use first, white on our gold background is never going to be ADA compliant. So this is something that we see quite often. Actually, we see gold text on a white background, and that is not ADA compliant. So just keep that in mind. White and gold don't typically go together. If it's a graphic element, it's probably okay, but not text. And then this particular primary logo doesn't utilize the vertical space well. So in this case, the stacked version is probably your best option because you can get the logo larger in the vertical space, and that dark blue gives you enough contrast on the gold background. Text is easier to read. The CSUB version could also be used in this instance if the audience was the appropriate audience. We see this a lot as well. We see a lot of people put the logos on top of photographs, and it's okay as long as the logo is legible. This particular background is really complex and it has limited vertical space. So if we tried to use even the primary reversed version, so for a dark background, because this is a darker background, it still doesn't give you enough contrast and it's very hard to read. So this is one of those instances where you would actually need to use like a solid color block behind the logo, because you'll see here, even when you do the white version, it just blends into the background. So this is a case where you would have to put a block of color behind it. And you could also put a block of gold behind the logo here and use the positive version of the logo with the blue text. That would work as well because there's solid color behind the logo. In most cases, you're going to need to put a solid block behind the logo of color because it just doesn't reproduce or read well. Now I just want to do a little focus on the shield just to show you all. There's a little detail here on the one for a light background versus the version for a dark background. You'll see even in the single color version, there's a small outline on the version that's supposed to be for dark backgrounds, and that just holds up the integrity of the shield. And so even in the single color version, you'll see there's still that small little white outline. Also, I see this a lot as well, and this is actually on some very early Zoom backgrounds that were produced before I actually came to the university. The sunburst and the crop rows should always be lighter than the background. So the one to the right was actually pulled from a screenshot of a Zoom background that's out and about there. So the proper way to put a logo on a photograph like this, just make sure that the sun and the crop rows are lighter than the background. So the one on the right would not be correct because the sun and the crop rows are darker than the background. And you can always download new Zoom versions backgrounds from the brand website. Clear space. What is clear space? It's just it's some space around the logo that ensures that it's not crowded or competing with the other elements. And basically all you need to do is take the width of the letter B and put it around the logo and make sure that there's nothing impeding into that space. A lot of times we see lots of logos together on the same page and they're really, really close together. We just ask that you give it a little breathing room and add some clear space around the logo. Also, another note that the logo shouldn't be used any smaller than 1/2 inch in height, if possible. I understand, like I've seen instances on, let's say, writing pens where it does have to be smaller. And those things will happen, but we just ask that for readability's sake, you try to keep it at least 1/2 inch in height. Resizing the logo. We also see this done improperly sometimes. And this is typical, like some of the Adobe applications now don't require that you hold the shift key down when you resize something. But most Microsoft applications do. So if you hold the shift key down when you're dragging to resize the logo, it will not skew the proportions, so it won't make it more vertical or horizontal. Just something to keep in mind when you're scaling the logo. And so here's another little quiz, and you can tell pretty immediately which one has not been scaled properly. 2 and 3, obviously, someone has not used the shift key when they've resized the logo there. And so we just want to make sure that the logo always appears as it's designed to. Few other things that we should not do to the logo. Don't stretch or skew the logo like we just talked about. Don't use it in outline form. Try not to put effects on the logo or animations. Don't change the colors of the logo. Seen it used in some strange colors before. Don't change the fonts of the logo. And then don't change the proportions of the shield to the text in the logo. So always maintain the integrity of the logo as they are provided to you. And these are some of the old logos that have been retired. The old academic shield, I still see used in lots of old forms and things like that. So if any of you see these things, these logos out there on forms or whatnot, just flag them. You can flag them. You can send an email to brand@csub.edu, and we'd be happy to help you update these. So the full-bodied Roadrunner, that's been retired for at least 10 years. And that's one we definitely should try to stay away from. From what I understand, there was a bit of a lawsuit with Warner Brothers over that particular mark. So we definitely don't want to be using the full-bodied Roadrunner. And then the 2 bottom, CSUB and CSU Bakersfield, those are old athletic marks that have also been retired. We're going to get into some new athletic marks here in a little bit, which will be something that most of you probably haven't seen yet, which is kind of fun. And then the 50-year campaign in the upper right, that one's been retired as well because we're past the 50-year mark. And so let's go into another little quiz here. Which of these is correct? This is a very strange colored background. Which one do we think is correct? Someone's replying in the chat. Lots of 3s and 4s. Nice job. Well, the correct one really is 4, but honestly, the contrast is good enough in 3 to work as well. It's barely good enough because I've done the math on it, but it is good as well. So 3 and 4 would work. So good job, everybody. I think everybody put 3 or 4. So well done. The top 2, the one on the upper left is the shield isn't right? The sun and the crop rows are darker, and they always need to be lighter. So that's why that one is incorrect. And then the one on the upper right, the yellow, just isn't enough contrast on that light blue background. We get this question a lot. Which version do I use? Do I use the version with the TM, which is the trademark symbol? or don't I? And kind of the rule of thumb here is if it's external facing, so any marketing, advertising, promotional items, you would use the trademark version. For internal audiences and digital communications, things like websites or what happened? Things like websites or just internal communications like newsletters and things like that, or where it's going to appear really small, you don't need to use the trademark version. But if anything external, just a rule of thumb, try to put the TM on it. I understand that when you use it at really small sizes, it doesn't reproduce well, even in print, and that should be a consideration too. But always try to use the TM version if it's external, if you can. School department and unit options. So we've given the university 4 options to use for specific school department and units, and we'll go over those 4 here. I think a lot of you are already familiar with these because I think we're up to over 200 different version requests for this. So that means you guys know that these exist and we've already created them for you, but we'll go over them again. This does give you guys kind of an opportunity to maintain like a unique identity, but we're still all one big branded family. And typically bigger schools like Oregon and some of the other schools only give 1 or 2 options, and we're giving 4 just for a little bit more flexibility. So version 1, we've got the primary unit logo, and that basically just puts your unit underneath a yellow line. Version 2 is the horizontal, which that puts you to the right of the yellow line there and makes it more horizontal. Version 3 is the prominent unit name. So that's puts you kind of more prominent to the university. And we see that, I think this is probably the favorite across the board. Everyone likes to use this one, typically when they're branding their departments or schools. And that's fine. We've given you that option and it works well. And it still ties into the overall parent brand. So we're happy with all 4 of these. And the stacked unit on the right, we've also seen used pretty heavily. Happy to create these for you. If you don't already have them, just send us an email, brand@csub.edu, and we'll get those created for you. The academic seal. This is the new academic seal. Most of you have already seen this. We typically only use this for official communications from the president's office, things like diplomas, transcripts, certificates and awards, commencement programs, things like that. We don't tend to use the seal on promotional items much or other print materials. We prefer that you use the university mark as opposed to the academic seal. This is kind of more reserved for official documents, I would say. And of course, it exists in multiple colors. It is always one color, but you can use it in white, black, blue, and gold. Athletic marks. So we'll get into, this is a little bit of this is something new that most of you haven't seen. Athletics has a couple of new fonts that they've integrated into their athletic marks, and we'll go into some of those here soon. But the Rowdy mascot head logo is kind of the main athletic mark. They do have it with a logo descriptor underneath now with this new font that they're using now. And that basically every sport, anything that you want to put under the Rowdy head that's athletic. Now, the athletic marks are not used to identify units or schools, anything in the academic world. It's only used to identify athletic entities. So sports are fine here, runners, Bakersfield, things like that, but we don't allow this to be used for schools or units or academic entities in the university. Lots of variations to the Rowdy mark as well. It also goes into single color. We like to use it full color if we can. And there's even a version that doesn't have the white outline that we use very sparingly, but it's also available for certain things like, embossing or etching or things like that. This is the B logo. I think it's pretty heavily used by baseball, wrestling. I think swimming I've seen use it a little bit, but this is also available for any athletic team out there. Also in lots of various versions. And then here are some of the new lockups for athletics. And some of you have probably seen these already. They're using them on uniforms and some signage and banners and whatnot. This is called the primary block lockup. We're using the rowdy head with text. And this, they use this. Sometimes it says runners, sometimes it says Bakersfield, sometimes it says the sport to the right. They're using this in various capacities in athletics. And I think it turns out really, really well, especially in uniforms. The primary script lockup. This is the script font that athletics has introduced. They lock the script up with the rowdy head as well. And this also exists in lots of different words and sports. So this is a really nice, I know basketball uses this a lot. I've seen this on their uniforms. It looks really nice on the uniforms as well. Old athletic marks, we've already kind of gone over these, except for the one in the bottom right. That basically is the old font that athletics was using. So we're not allowed to use that old font moving forward. Our CLC, our licensing agency, and the bookstore is aware of the font change, and we're kind of disseminating that across all of our vendors. And so the old font will no longer be able to be used. Co-branding with student clubs and organizations. So student clubs are basically the only ones we are allowing to create their own logos. We're not trying to stifle student clubs' creativity. So they are allowed to create their own logos outside of the brand guidelines, and they're the only entity on campus allowed to do that. We are, however, wanting and allowing them to co-brand with the university. Sometimes they want to, sometimes they don't, and that's okay. But we do have standards in place and guidelines in place if they want to do that. So here are a couple options there. You can either use the CSUB lockups, or you can use the spelled out primary and stacked versions. And then here are just a couple examples of clubs that are actually using this. And I think it looks quite nice. They put these on print materials. I've seen them on shirts and whatnot. You can use it in single color to complement the logo that's been created. Here's another instance. And a lot of times clubs will come to us and say, we have this old logo. Can you help us update it? And can you help us co-brand with the university? And obviously the answer is absolutely yes. We'd love to help them do that. And these are two examples of that. There's also examples of clubs that want to keep their logos, and that's absolutely fine. And we just we'll create these co-branded samples for them to use. Multiple logos. I get questions about this a lot, especially when there's lots of units and schools and departments that are sponsoring a particular event. That's where I see this most. We don't want to put multiple logos on the same sheet or the same place. So what we ask, so in this case, there's three entities here: Campus Programming, the Edible Garden, and ASN. They want to sponsor a particular event. And to put all three logos on the same sheet as a sponsor, it clutters it, and it's repetitive. So there's really no need for it. What we want you to do in this instance is use the primary version, which is always the preferred version, and then just list the schools, units, or departments in text only underneath. And here's a good example. Just use one of the university fonts, Open Sans, or you can use Oswald as well. Use blue or gray, center them and alphabetize them. And just be mindful of the clear space around the logo. So you wouldn't want to butt these names up right against the logo. Just give them a little space. And this is the way I've seen instances where there's probably, I don't know, 8 to 10 entities underneath listed. And you can imagine if you had 8 to 10 logos on a sheet, how cluttered and how visually chaotic that would be. So this is a much simpler way to identify multiple entities. So if you have any questions about this, feel free to reach out. I think all of you are pretty familiar with our colors by now. Main colors is blue and gold. These actually did not change. These are one of the things that did not change from all of our previous branding before October of 2021. the vote was taken, and these were the two colors that were used before. The secondary colors were introduced, however, and these can also be used in marketing materials and graphic design. Black and white, of course, can always be used as neutrals. I think in promotional items, we try to steer clear of black, use gray if you can. But we know, like, I think there's a couple sports teams that have black uniforms, and that's okay. They're also using the blue and gold on them. So we just prefer, blue and gold are the primaries. Try to use those if you can, but we understand if you veer over to the secondaries sometimes. How do I apply the colors? So a lot of times people know the colors, but they don't know how to actually apply them in their daily work environments, particularly the Microsoft applications. And so here's a little instruction on how to do that. And all Microsoft applications are pretty similar. The Pantone 661 blue, for instance, here's an example of how to do that. If you click on the little text icon in your toolbar, click on more colors down at the bottom, it opens up this colors dialog. You click over to the RGB slider, and you can either enter the RGB values, which are 0, 53, and 148, or you can enter the hex code at the bottom, which in this case is 003594. That's probably easiest, and that's what I do typically. And then once you hit OK, that color will be added to your color palettes in your Microsoft Word applications. And a kind of cool trick, what I found, at least on the Mac platform, it works this way. If you don't have a document open, so if you're just in a Microsoft application and you add these colors to your color palettes before you open a document, it will actually keep them in there for every document you open from that point moving forward. If you have a document open, for whatever reason, it stores it in that document information, and it doesn't do that. I don't know if some of you that are using PCs can test that, but at least on the Mac platform, if you do it without a document open, they'll always be there for you moving forward. So it's easy. It's an easy thing just to do once, add all of the colors in there, and then you always have them available to you. Now we'll talk a little bit about ADA compliance, what I talked about earlier about gold on a white background. There's a website, and I've got the URL here. I'll send this presentation out so you can all have this as a resource later. But this is a contrast checker that the ITS group was able to provide for us, that they use on a daily basis for their websites and digital tools. But basically what you do here is you enter the foreground color and the background color hex codes, which we just introduced, and it will tell you what the contrast ratio is, and it will tell you if it fails or passes. So you'll see here our foreground color is FFC 72C, which is our gold, or our Pantone 123. Background color is white, and it fails pretty horribly. It's at 1.56. It needs to be at least 4.5 to 1, and so we're way off the mark there. Larger text, it is 3 to 1. We're still not even close to being there. So this is a good thing to test if you're building applications or if you're creating, printed materials. Just check this, and it's a great resource. I'm sure that you're all probably familiar with fonts as well by now. If you're not, these are the 3 main fonts that we are using: 2 sans serif fonts and then a serif font. These are all downloadable. They're all open source. So if you have rights on your computer to download and install fonts, you can just do this on csub.edu/brand. Or if you don't have those rights, you can contact ITS and they can help you through that. Now, I just wanted to showcase some of the folks that are doing a great job. And these are some of the winners of our beautiful branding contest. Just great examples of how people are paying attention to when to use the negative version, when to use the stacked version, when to use the unit forward, and just all great instances of use of color and use of the correct fonts. So kudos to all of you that are using the brand elements properly. you're reaching out. If you don't know, we get lots of inquiries about, what to use, if it's okay to use, certain colors in certain instances. So these are all great applications of how to use the brand elements. And with that, we're going to go into this month's contest winner, and that's Jeanette Rivera. She submitted this CECE highlights flyer. It's going to highlight the internships, volunteer job opportunities, along with employers' informational sessions. You're seeing she's using the Unit Forward logo here in the upper right. And it's just super creative. She's using the right colors. Fonts are good. She's even using the QR code, which is great. So I just think it's a really creative way to use the brand elements here. I'm not sure if this was a Canva template or not, but I've seen a lot of, it was, okay.
Yeah, this was through Canva.
Yeah, excellent. And Canva is a great resource, and actually trying to, one of the things I'd like to do is get the university a corporate license for Canva and have a branded corporate kind of a Canva environment where all of these things would kind of be available to you, templates and colors and all the different logos and whatnot. So that's something maybe on the horizon. But congrats, Jeanette. Great job again. I know that you always produce, and your team always produce really, really nice stuff that's well branded. So appreciate it. And I encourage you all to submit your entries. $50 gift card each month we're giving away. So continue to ask questions and build well-branded materials. Open it up for questions now. You can do that through the chat, or you can raise your hand. Nadia says Adobe Express has many good templates too. Oh, that's a good idea. I'd like to talk to you offline about that, Nadia. Maybe there's a way to actually create a branded environment in Adobe Express. Pierre, I see you submit a solutions consulting with campus-wide Canva. That'd be great. Does that exist already, Pierre? Do we have a campus-wide Canva account?
We don't. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah. We don't have a campus-wide, but if this was going to be, let's say, a campus-wide license, and it was paid for, however that would be paid for, it has to be submitted through Solutions Consulting. But I'll just let you know, we've already started approving one-off requests for Canva, which means it is part of the software that's allowed to be used, yeah. So if we wanted one that has all of the logos, yeah, it would have to be kind of like an enterprise application. It probably costs, there's a higher cost opposed to buying it individually. But yeah, we can talk. It's just that once you figure out the funding, then it would be put through Solutions Consulting, and I know that we would approve it because we've approved other uses of it.
Okay, that's great news. I'll look into the cost, and we'll see if you have the budget for it. Just kidding.
Oh yeah, exactly. Tongue in cheek, right?
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
Let's see.
It always comes down to, when you say, oh, if there's funding, then everybody runs.
Indeed.
Yeah.
And Jessica has a question here. Will the new athletic fonts be available for all departments to use? Unfortunately not, Jessica, unless you are an athletic entity. We have a really limited license on those fonts. Those are actually paid and licensed fonts. They're not open source fonts, so they're not available for the whole campus. So I know that was a lot of review for most of you, and I don't know, maybe some of you missed the first meeting that we had, but if you have any questions, now's the time. Ed's had something here on this slide. Center figure is wearing just the shield with no text. Can the shield be used? Yes, it can. To answer your question, Can the shield be used like that on, in other words, on its own? Yes, it can be. We're using that sparingly. You see, what we usually like to do is if you're going to use the shield on its own like that, Ed, we like to have some type of logo presence or at least the school name somewhere. So you'll see on this slide, we do have the full logo down in the bottom right of the slide. So there's both. But yes, we have used it on its own, typically with the text of the university somewhere or another logo. Natasha, have we considered a logo for the campus use with the rowdy head? In limited, so yes, we have, and it's going to be okay to use that for like student facing things and recruiting for the most part. I mean, I know that enrollment uses it for recruiting purposes, and we're allowing that, but not all the time. The university has an academic mark and a university mark, and those are the two that we prefer to use. The rowdy head is pretty much reserved for athletics, and there's been a few exceptions. For instance, Future Runner Day is an event coming up in March, and we elected to use it there because it's a recruiting tool. We're trying to get people to sign on to become road runners, so it made sense in that instance. So, but what we don't want is that rowdy is the identifier for the university, if that makes sense. Okay, I don't see any more questions here. Anyone else have questions? Okay, well, we're always available here at brand@csub.edu. Reach out anytime you have questions, and we're always happy to help. We're a resource here for you, and we appreciate all of your attention to detail and continue to do great work. I appreciate it. And see you guys next time.